What would you do if God answered your prayers, but the price was your soul? The smell of death filled the air when the rains came to Johnson's house in Enugu. His neighbors walked past his gate and covered their noses. They looked at each other with worry. One woman said, "Something has died in there." Another woman said, "Maybe it's just a dead rat." But rats don't smell like this, and something else was very wrong. The neighbors said Johnson was always a quiet man, but his wife Angoy used to say hello to everyone. Their 2 children, Ibuka and Chidera, always played under the mango tree across the street. You could hear them laughing every evening. But for 2 months now, there was only silence around their house. It felt like a curse had fallen on the place. People thought the family had gone somewhere. They asked Johnson, "Where is your family?" He would just smile and say, "They went away." "Went away?" someone would ask. "Yes, to the village," he would say. But this was all a lie. It was a young man named Ifani who first raised the alarm. He was renting a room next to Johnson's main living room. The smell was becoming too much to bear. It wasn't just bad, it was evil. When the police came and broke open the floor tiles, Johnson said it was just a problem with the sewage. But what they found shook the whole community to its core. 3 bodies lay there, Ngoy, Ibuka, and Chidera. They were wrapped in white cloth and holding each other. Under them was fresh cement, proof of panic, regret, and something much darker. Johnson didn't cry when they found them. He just sat there, staring into space and saying Bible verses over and over. The news spread like wildfire. Some people said he was possessed by demons. Others whispered it was some kind of political ritual gone wrong. But the truth, as the detectives would later discover, was far more terrifying. Ngoy had been threatening to expose him. She had found out something that no man of God should ever be involved in, and she refused to stay quiet about it. Johnson hadn't always been rich. He used to be a simple pastor, not the kind with fancy cars and huge churches, but a humble, gentle man who loved to pray. He started preaching when he was just 17 years old. Back then, people called him Brother Johnson. His voice was soft, his heart was pure, and his passion was unmatched. He would go from house to house in their small town. He wasn't looking for money or asking for donations. He just wanted to pray. He would knock softly on doors and say, "Good evening, sir. Can I pray with your family?" He would smile gently. The women would give him water to drink. The men would pat his shoulder kindly. Some people would give him food. But Johnson never asked for anything. No money, no donations, nothing. He didn't shout when he prayed. He didn't push people to fall down. He didn't say, "Give me your money." He would just hold their hands, close his eyes, and say quiet words. Words that touched their hearts like a mother's lullaby. Some people believed in his prayers, others didn't. And there was one thing Johnson could not do: miracles. He couldn't make blind people see. He couldn't make disabled people walk. He didn't shout during prayers. He didn't make people fall down during healing sessions. He didn't speak in strange tongues. He didn't do signs and wonders. And because of this, his church, a simple wooden building made with borrowed nails and donated wood, stayed empty every Sunday. Johnson's church was very small. It had no bell, no paint, and no roof that could keep out heavy rain. It was just wooden planks nailed together by kind neighbors. The sign outside said House of Mercy. But mercy was the only thing that stayed there. Every Sunday, he would sweep the floor. He would clean the chairs. He would arrange the few Bibles on the dusty bench. Then he would put on his clean white shirt and wait. But nobody came. Not a single person. He would stand by the door, smiling at people walking by. "Happy Sunday," he would say. They would smile back and say, "Thank you, Pastor." Then they would get in their cars and drive away to big churches with loud music and big crowds. These were churches where the workers wore matching uniforms and pastors used microphones with golden heads. churches with air conditioning, dancers. On stage, powerful preachers from around the world, shouting amen, and people falling and rolling on the ground during healing sessions. But Johnson's church had only silence and wind moving between empty chairs. He would walk to the front slowly. He would open his Bible gently, and then he would begin. He would sing alone, clap alone, and pray alone. "Let us open to Psalm 23, he would say, even though no one was there. Sometimes, as he preached, tears would roll down his face. He would stop, take out a small handkerchief, wipe his face, and then continue with a shaking voice. In his heart, he believed someone was listening, not the villagers or rich people, but God. From Monday to Saturday, Johnson would walk around again, knocking on doors, laying hands on sick children, comforting people who had lost loved ones, and reading Psalm 91 over pregnant women. Then Sunday would come, and again he would be alone. Sometimes he would cry before starting the service, but he always got up and wiped his tears. He would sing, pray, and preach to the walls. He believed truly that one day God would reward him, that one day heaven would open for him. But it didn't happen the way he expected. One day, as usual, Johnson was moving from house to house, praying with tired eyes but steady feet. The sun was setting, and the streets were becoming quiet. He entered a small mud house tucked behind a narrow alley, where an old woman lived with her young granddaughter. The girl, barely 12 years old, was lying on a mat. Her body was burning with fever. Her lips were dry, her eyes were half closed, and her breathing was slow and tired. The old woman sat on the floor, fanning her with a torn magazine. Her hands were shaking, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked up as Johnson entered. "She has typhoid," the old woman said. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday. I don't have money for the hospital." Johnson knelt beside the girl. He placed his hand gently on her forehead. He didn't shout or shake. He just closed his eyes and whispered, "Lord, please have mercy." Minutes passed. Then the girl opened her eyes. "Grandma," she said softly, "I'm hungry." The old woman gasped. She dropped the magazine and hugged the girl tightly. Johnson reached into his pocket and brought out all the little money people had given him that week. "Use this," he said. "Buy medicine and food." The old woman held the money with both hands and began to cry. "God will bless you. You are a true servant." Johnson stood up and smiled. "She'll be fine," he said, turning to leave. But as he stepped outside, the old woman called him back. "My son," she said, her voice low and deep, "your heart is good, but a good heart won't fill your church." Johnson stopped and looked at her. "I can take you to a place where powerful men of God receive their power, real power. Not just simple prayers, power to make blind people see and deaf people hear, even power to raise the dead. That's where big pastors go. They weren't born with power, they received it. And you can receive it too. You'll be great. Your church will overflow. People will come from far and wide." Johnson didn't answer. He looked at the girl again. She was drinking water now, her small hands shaking. Then he looked at the woman, and without saying a word, he turned and walked away. But her words followed him like a shadow. A good heart won't fill your church. As he stepped outside, he noticed something strange. People were running everywhere. He stopped a person passing by. "What's happening?" The young man didn't stop running. He shouted, "Follow me. Come and see for yourself." Johnson followed, his heart pounding. That evening, the town square was packed with people. Everyone was shouting, clapping, and singing. Dust was dancing in the air. Drums were beating like hearts on fire. In the middle of the crowd stood a man in a white suit. His shoes were shiny, his voice was loud, and his hands moved like thunder. He was a big pastor, one of those who came from the city. A blind man stood in front of him. The man's eyes were closed, and his hands were shaking. "Today," the pastor shouted, "you will see again." People screamed, phones went up. and the drums grew louder. He touched the man's forehead. The man fell down. Then there was silence for a few seconds. Then the man opened his eyes. "I can see," he shouted. He stood up. "I can see." The crowd went wild. Women threw their headscarves in the air. Men dropped money at the pastor's feet. Some people rolled on the ground. Others promised to join his church that very day. "He's a real man of God," one woman cried. "He has the anointing," another said. In the middle of all this excitement, standing at the edge of the crowd, was Johnson. No one saw him, but he saw everything. He saw the joy, the power, and the money. Something inside him cracked. He touched the Bible in his hand. It felt cold. He looked at the sky. It looked quiet. Then, with dust on his feet and fire in his chest, Johnson turned around. He walked quickly back through the bush path, past the broken wall, back to the mud house. He knocked once. The door opened slowly. The old woman looked at him, her eyes still the same. He didn't wait for her to speak. "Mama," he said, his voice low, "I'm ready." That night, the air was cold. The stars hid behind clouds. Even the moon refused to come out. The old woman tied her wrapper tight and held a small lamp. "Follow me," she said. Johnson followed. They passed tall trees and crossed small rivers. They walked where no footsteps had ever walked before. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. No crickets, no frogs, just silence. A silence so deep it made heartbeats sound louder. After walking for a long time, they reached a wide clearing. The ground was black. The sky above them seemed to have disappeared, like the forest had swallowed it. In the middle, smoke rose from a giant clay bowl. The smoke curled like a snake, dancing slowly into the air. 7 women stood around the bowl. They wore black clothes. Their faces were painted white, like chalk or bone. Their eyes were shiny, bright, and still. No one moved. Then one of them spoke, though her lips didn't move. "Tell us what you want." Johnson's voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. "I want to heal people," he said. "I want to do miracles. I want my church to be full." One of the women stepped forward. She held out her hand. In it was a black ring. It looked like stone, but it glowed softly, like fire sleeping inside it. "Wear this on your right hand," she said. "When you want to heal someone, pray a little, then place your hand on their head. Just touch them." Johnson took the ring. He looked at it and slid it onto his finger. The wind around him stopped. The forest held its breath. The old woman nodded. "Go," she said. "Use it and see." Johnson turned and began to walk back. But behind him, the smoke still rose, and the women watched him with eyes that never blinked. The sun was still rising when Johnson stepped out the next morning. He held his Bible and wore his clean shirt, but this time something was different. On his right hand, the black ring sat quietly. It didn't shine or shake, but it felt heavy, like it was holding something powerful. He walked through the town like before, but this time he was looking for someone to touch. Then he saw him, Mr. Udo, the man who had lived in a wheelchair for many years. His legs didn't work, and his back was bent. He used to be a strong man, but now he sat in front of his shop every day, silent and staring. Johnson walked closer. "Good morning, sir." Mr. Udo looked up. "Ah, Pastor Johnson, you still walk around everywhere. Let me pray for you today," Johnson said. Mr. Udo laughed, not a small laugh, but a big laugh that shook his belly. "Pray. Even big men of God with private jets couldn't help me. What can you do? You're just the one who walks around praying." Johnson didn't answer. He just stepped closer. He raised his right hand and slowly placed it on Mr. Udo's head. "In the name of Jesus," he whispered, "be healed." Nothing moved at first. Then Mr. Udo blinked. He looked down. He lifted his right leg, then his left. Then he stood up. He didn't fall or wobble. He stood like a tree with new roots. People came running from every corner. A woman carrying tomatoes screamed. A boy dropped his bicycle. A man walking by removed his cap. "Jesus," one person shouted. "It's a miracle," another said. "Pastor Johnson has power." People gathered around them. Some clapped, some knelt, some wept. Mr. Udo hugged Johnson tightly. "You healed me. You did what others could not do." Johnson smiled just a little. He looked at his right hand. The ring didn't glow, but his reputation had started to shine. For the first time, Pastor Johnson had performed a miracle. Sunday came, and for the first time ever, the wooden church was full of people. They stood at the windows and sat on stones outside. They didn't come just to look, they came to believe. Johnson wore his white shirt and carried his Bible under his arm. The ring was on his hand. He walked to his small wooden church, as always, but this time people followed him. Some came with walking sticks, some with crutches, some with blind eyes and broken hearts. Some just came to see what would happen. By the time Johnson opened the wooden door, all the benches were full. Mothers held babies, fathers stood near the windows, and children sat on the floor. Even outside, people waited. The church that used to echo with emptiness now shook with footsteps. Johnson didn't shout or dance. He just prayed. Then he called out a madman from the crowd, the madman who had wandered the town for 10 years. Everyone knew him. He used to walk around with no shirt, talking to trees and laughing at walls. Johnson touched his head and prayed. The man screamed, fell down, and rolled around. Then he sat up with clear eyes and a calm voice. He looked around and said, "Where am I?" The crowd roared, "Pastor Johnson has the fire. He's a real man of God." They dropped money at his feet. They brought envelopes filled with cash. They gave him land, cows, and cars. Soon, his name spread like wind through dry leaves. By the next Sunday, people stood outside the church because there was no more space inside. Even other pastors came to see for themselves. Johnson continued, healing the sick, making blind people see, mute people talk, and disabled people walk. He helped people avoid accidents and escape poverty. He started selling miracle oil. He blessed handkerchiefs. He gave out water in small bottles and told people to drink it before sleeping. People came from other towns and far places. Buses parked outside his church. They called him Daddy and Fire Prophet. When the church could no longer hold all the people, he started planning to tear it down and build a bigger one with land. That had been given to him by one of his church members. And that was when the old woman returned with a new request. The night was quiet, too quiet. Even the dogs didn't bark. Johnson was in his room reading the Bible. His hand touched the ring gently, like it was part of his skin now. Then he heard a knock, slow and soft, 3 times. He opened the door. The old woman stood there with the same wrapper and calm eyes. She didn't smile or come inside. She just said, "It is time." Johnson looked at her. His heart wasn't beating fast. It was steady, like he already knew she would come. "You have used the power well," she said, "but now you must give something back. To make the new church successful forever, you must bury the blood of 7 cows under it." "Is that all?" Johnson asked. "That is all," she replied. The next day, he bought 7 cows, big ones, black and brown. That night, under the dark sky, Johnson carried a knife. One by one, he brought them out. One by one, he cut their necks. The ground drank the blood. He collected it in a large container, red, thick, and warm. He dug a deep hole where the altar would stand. He buried the cows with their eyes still open and their mouths still full of breath. He poured the blood into another hole, sealed it, with sand, then with cement. He wiped his hands. His white shirt had turned red. He carried the container to the forest where the old woman waited. He gave it to her. She nodded without saying a word, turned, and walked back into the darkness. Within weeks, the new church was finished. It had big speakers, bright lights, a shining altar, and soft red carpet. On the day of the opening, thousands of people came. Men in suits, women in lace, sick people, rich people, poor people. The church overflowed. Johnson stood at the front, and from the crowd, someone shouted, "Long live the man of God!" But deep down, something else was growing, quiet and watching. The days became sweet like ripe mangoes in the dry season. Johnson got married. Her name was Angoy. Her skin was soft like the evening breeze, and her smile could calm a storm. She sat beside him in church, always quiet and gentle. Soon they had 2 children. Ebuka was the boy, strong and playful. He loved to run, climb trees, and ask questions like, "Daddy, can God see us through the roof?" Chidera was the girl, soft and kind. She followed her brother everywhere, holding his hand like it was her favorite toy. People loved their family. Women whispered, "God truly blessed this man." Men said, "That's the kind of home I want." They called them the perfect family. The church was full every Sunday, overflowing with chairs outside and speakers turned up loud. Miracles happened everywhere. Blind eyes opened, sick people walked. Couples who couldn't have babies gave testimonies with twins in their arms. Johnson had cars now, big ones, black ones, long ones. He had houses in different places. People came to him for prayers, favors, and blessings. Everything was sweet until one night when the old woman came again. The knock came again, that same slow knock, 3 times. Angoy was asleep, and so were the children. Johnson opened the door. She stood there, the old woman with the same eyes, same wrapper, same silence. She didn't come inside or blink. She only said, "It is time again. It's been years. You've grown big. Now we require more." Johnson's face dropped. "How many?" he asked. 30 cows, she said. Then she turned and disappeared into the dark. Johnson didn't argue or ask why. He just nodded. The next day he bought 30 cows, big ones. They filled the backfield like moving shadows. At night, when the town was quiet and the stars were hiding, he began. One by one, he did it. Blood filled the container again, thick and dark, like a secret that shouldn't be told. He tied a black cloth around his head. His hands were red, his clothes were stained, but his eyes were calm to calm. He walked to the church. The altar had a space now, a deep round hole, waiting to swallow what was given. Johnson knelt by it, holding the container with both hands. The blood inside moved slowly, like it was alive, but he didn't know that Angoy had woken up. She didn't see him beside her in bed. She waited and listened. Then she stood up and followed him barefoot, slowly, her wrapper dragging on the floor, her heart beating like thunder in a bottle. She reached the church quietly, pushed the door gently, and what she saw made her breath stop. Her husband, the man of God, was kneeling beside a hole with blood dripping from a container. His white clothes were soaked in red. Her mouth opened before she could think. "Jesus Christ!" she screamed. Johnson turned sharply. Their eyes met, hers full of fear, his full of anger. Before she could run, he blocked the door and knelt in front of her. "Please don't tell anyone," he begged. "I helped an old woman once. She promised I would never have to harm a human being. That's why I only use cows. But Angoy wouldn't listen. You're not a man of God. I will expose you tomorrow morning in front of everyone." Then she turned and ran fast out of the church, back toward the house. But Johnson followed, not walking, but running like a shadow with no name. Angoy ran fast. Her feet slapped the ground, and her wrapper flew behind her like it was chasing the wind. She reached the house, opened the door, and entered the living room. Her hands were shaking, but she picked up her phone and dialed quickly. "Hello, come to my house right now." Tomorrow I'll tell the whole world what I saw. Johnson stepped in slowly. His chest was rising and falling, and his eyes were empty. He said nothing at first. Then softly he spoke. Ngoy, please. She turned to him, her hand still holding the phone. You're not a man of God, she said. You're a devil in white clothes. Please, he begged. They promised me no human blood, only cow blood. I did it for the church. I did it for us. But Ngoy didn't stop. She kept talking, her voice growing louder, her hands moving fast. I will go to the altar and tell everyone. You kill cows like sacrifices. You're not a pastor. And that's when Johnson's eyes changed. If she can't be quiet, I will make her quiet myself. He walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer, and picked up a knife. Ngoy didn't see it at first. Then she turned and screamed, but it was too late. 1 stab, 2 stabs, 3 stabs, then silence. Blood touched the chair, the table, and the white walls. Suddenly, 2 small pairs of feet rushed in. The noise had woken the children. Ibuka came first, with Chidera behind him. They stood by the door. Mommy, Chidera said softly. Then they saw her on the floor, and their father holding something sharp. They screamed loud, full of fear and pain. Johnson turned to them, his hands red, and his eyes dark. 1 stab, 2 stabs. Silence again. Now the house was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath, afraid to speak. That night, the stars did not shine. The house was dark with no light and no sound, just one man digging. Johnson stood in the middle of the living room holding a shovel. The tiles were broken now, and the ground was open. The hole was deep, and Ngoy's body lay beside the children. He didn't cry or speak. He just worked slowly and heavily, like someone building a grave in his own heart. He wrapped Ngoy in cloth, blue and gold, then Ibuka, then Chidera. He placed them gently, one after the other, like they were going to sleep. He covered them with sand, then cement. He smoothed it with his hands, wiped the floor, washed his tools, changed his clothes, and just like that, it was gone. In the days that followed, he told the church and the town that his family had traveled. My wife and children went on a trip, he told the church. People nodded. Family vacation, they said. No one asked questions because Pastor Johnson wasn't just a pastor. He was a man of God. Weeks passed. The church grew louder, and the people clapped harder. But the floor in his living room waited. Nobody noticed anything until the young man who rented a room near the living room complained about the smell. The police came, broke the floor, and found them, Ngoy, Ibuka, and Chidera, wrapped in white cloth and holding each other. Pastor Johnson didn't cry. He just sat there, muttering Bible verses. He confessed everything. The town mourned, and the nation wept. He was arrested and taken to court. The courtroom was full. People sat without moving, and no one smiled. The air was heavy, like it didn't want to breathe. Johnson sat in the middle, with his hands tied and his white robe dirty. The judge stood with a hammer in his hand. Pastor Johnson, the judge said, for killing your wife and children and hiding them under your floor, ... Johnson didn't blink or cry. He just sat looking ahead. Then, just before the hammer dropped, his eyes opened wide. He gasped and sat up. He was in his room. The sun was rising, and birds were singing. The ring was still on his hand, and the Bible was beside him. It was all a dream so real, it left sweat on his skin and fear in his bones. He touched his face and chest. He looked at the ring again. Then slowly and quietly, he took it. Off he stood up, opened his door, walked outside, and threw the ring far into the bush. From that day on, Johnson stopped chasing power. He stopped wanting crowds and asking for miracles. He just prayed gently and softly, like he did when he was a boy. God had shown him what would happen if he took a path that wasn't meant for him. He still walked from house to house, still carried his Bible, and still wore his white shirt. But now his voice was calmer, and his heart was lighter. When people asked, "Pastor, don't you want a big church again?" he would smile and say, "No," because he had seen what power without peace could do. And so, Pastor Johnson lived quietly. He died with nothing, no cars, no big titles, but his grave was clean, and his heart was clean too. What did you learn from this tale? Sometimes the greatest power comes from staying humble and accepting what God has given you, rather than chasing what seems better, but comes with a terrible price.